Shabbat Shalom. Last week I was invited by the regional office of the American Jewish Committee to participate on a panel of Houston rabbis. The topic of discussion was the future of the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community, specifically the unorthodox American Jewish community. My colleagues on the panel were Rabbi David Lyon of Beth Israel, Rabbi Renon Teller of Brit Shalom, and Rabbi Pam Silk of Emmanuel. Bobby Lapin was our moderator. The premise of the conversation was the recent Pew Research studies of American Jews and Israeli Jews. Bobby Lapin did a wonderful presentation summarizing some of the findings from the study of Israeli Jews, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details that he presented here. The gist of the report is probably something you all already know, and that is Israel is divided between ultra-Orthodox Jews called Haredim, Orthodox Jews, traditional Jews, and self-described secular Jews. Not a surprise to any of us, as I said. Israeli Jews are also divided about how much they think that the state of Israel should be operated according to Jewish tradition. Should the buses run on Shabbat and holidays? Should there be an option for civil marriage so that non-observant Jews don't have to put up with the Orthodox rabbinate when they want to get married? Who is a Jew, and who determines who is a Jew? And then there are also divisions over how to deal with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, how to integrate non-Jewish Israeli citizens into the society. Can Israel be both a democracy and a Jewish state at the same time? And, if so, how should the state navigate between these two somewhat disparate objectives? It's generally thought that the American Jews, and particularly, but not only, the unorthodox American Jews, would find it difficult to identify with an Israel that did not uphold democratic, pluralistic, and generally liberal values. For instance, egalitarian worship at the Western Wall continues to be intensely fought over. Our conservative and reform rabbis cannot perform weddings that are recognized by the State of Israel, and our conversions in Israel are also not recognized. These and similar issues tend to put off the non-Orthodox American Jewish community. But before I go on, let me just clarify a couple of points here. First of all, I, as you know, run a conversion program, and several of my students have applied to make Aliyah. And they have, for the most part, been successful in becoming Israeli citizens. So my conversions, and those of my colleagues, are considered Jewish for purposes of making Aliyah, becoming Israeli citizens. The problem comes when they want to marry a nice Jewish boy or a nice Jewish girl in Israel, because then only certain Orthodox rabbis can officiate at weddings in Israel, and all of those rabbis insist on investigating the Jewish status of the two parties getting married, and they absolutely do not recognize Reform, Conservative, and even many Orthodox conversions. So these Jews by choice cannot get married in Israel. And that, in my opinion, is indeed a shanda, an embarrassment. There are, of course, ways to get around that problem. Many secular Israelis who don't care for the Orthodox rabbinate anyway often get married in Cyprus. Israel recognizes the laws of other countries, so the state will recognize their non-Jewish wedding. And that is also a shanda, in my opinion. It is a shanda that Jews need to leave the Jewish state in order to get married in a way that is recognized by the state of Israel. The other point I want to clarify is that this also affects many Orthodox rabbis as well, whose conversions are also not accepted and who cannot perform weddings in Israel either. And many Orthodox Jews and Orthodox rabbis also believe it's important for Israel to be more pluralistic. In addition to the problems of pluralism, many American Jews are disturbed by the politics in Israel, the ruling coalition government and its policies with respect to Arabs and Israel's neighbors. Now, I'm not going to address those issues tonight, except to say that I think if we are frustrated by who is Prime Minister of Israel, we need to ask ourselves how we like the politics in this country. Given the election season, need I say any more? That is the nature of democracy, for better or worse, and the same exists in Israel. Some people love Netanyahu, some people really dislike him. But Israel is not, should not, and cannot be defined by who is prime minister. For the Jewish people, it is so very much more important. So here are 3 points I tried to make last Sunday night at the panel discussion. First, we need to remember the big picture. We are so blessed to live at a time when we have a Jewish state. Our ancestors for 2,000 years could only dream of this possibility. They so fervently desired to have our nation restored to its homeland that they wove this yearning aspiration into all of our prayers, even prayers where it didn't even belong. If you were to took out all the pages from this prayer book that had any mention about going home to Israel in it, it would be about 1/4 the size. Our generation lives in a time of miracles. Something no other people has ever done happened. We returned home after being displaced for centuries. That is the big picture. And Israel is a haven for Jews and a fountain of Jewish culture that gives us hope and courage, which is why we send our kids there on birthright trips and other tours and full-year programs. We must never lose sight of this big picture. For all the problems we think we have, the state of Israel is incomparably a blessing for us. In fact, there are today only 2 significant Jewish communities in the entire world. The huge Jewish communities of Europe were obliterated by the Nazis and have never recovered. So about 5.5 to 6 million Jews live in the United States, and about 6 million Jews live in the state of Israel. And the next largest Jewish population is France, with about 400,000. And then Canada, also about 400,000. And then England, 300,000. And from there, it goes way downhill really quick. Basically, the future of the Jewish people rests in the hands of the American Jews and Israeli Jews. We need each other. And that is the big picture. The second point is that it's not surprising that Israeli Jews and American Jews would tend to see some issues differently. In terms of the Arab-Israeli conflict, we are thousands of miles away in a place of relative safety. Our children do not have to serve in the military to protect our homes or our lives. We're not in the middle of a very volatile and violent Middle East. Now, I'm not saying that there is no room for criticism, but I am suggesting that we really ought to have a little bit of humility on this subject. Before we criticize, we would do well to learn all of the complicated aspects of the conflict. Living across the ocean and being dependent on the media that has no patience for history, nuance, or complexity, and frequently is in fact biased against Israel, we should be very cautious in our criticisms, and even more importantly, how we voice our concerns, so as not to give ammunition to those who really seek to destroy Israel and not to improve it. But I promise not to get into that issue, so let me give you an example of an issue dealing with pluralism. We are very concerned about having a prayer space at the Western Wall for egalitarian services. Israelis don't see that as a big deal. Why not? Because among the non-Orthodox Israeli population, very few of them ever go to Jerusalem, and if they do, they practically never go to the Western Wall at all. So it doesn't matter to them what the Orthodox do with the Western Wall. It's not part of their lives. We care because on all of our tours and all of our missions and all of our trips to Israel, we go to the Western Wall, and we want it to have a place for us. So this is an issue where I think we just need to educate our Israeli cousins in Israel about why this matters to us so much. By the way, historically speaking, Israel was founded by secular socialist Jews who thought that Reform and conservative Judaism were Galut Judaism, that is, Judaism of the diaspora. And many of these early Zionists, who were not at all religious, felt that they had no need for Jewish beliefs and customs that were invented in the diaspora, because after all, they were creating a Judaism in our homeland, a new kind of Jew in the homeland, and they didn't need the diaspora manifestations of Judaism. But that was a huge mistake, in my opinion. Reform and conservative Judaism are not Galut Judaism, but rather responses to modern post-Enlightenment world that we all live in. And guess what? Secular Israelis are part of that modern post-Enlightenment world too. And it may well be that our responses to modernity would actually resonate with them if they would just take a moment and listen to what we had to say about that subject. But in any case, there are for sure differences of opinion on a variety of political and religious issues. Rabbi Teller described it as similar to having a long-distance relationship. I think that is in many ways a good analogy, and that leads me to my third point. What can we do about this disconnect? Diane and I, unfortunately, had a long-distance relationship for 2 years while she was in cantorial school. She was in New York and I was in Los Angeles. And we survived partly because she would fly out to LA every month. And we talked every day on the phone. So by analogy, we need to build in stronger lines of communication between our two communities, making sure our kids go to Israel, not just for a 10-day birthright trip, but for longer programs that afford them the opportunity to experience Israel outside of the five-star hotels. We need to deepen our understanding of Israel way beyond falafel balls, camels, and temple hats. Fortunately, we live in the 21st century when we have access to Israeli movies and TV and newspapers and websites. We need to bring more Israeli shlichim, emissaries, here to Houston, not only so we can learn from them, but so they can see American Jews in our community and go back to Israel and tell them what they saw here. We need to deepen our own understanding of Jewish history, our faith and traditions, the Hebrew language, and the Bible. When we enrich our own understanding of who we are as Jews, we will automatically be more understanding of the critical importance of Israel to the Jewish people. And we need to connect with our natural partners in the Israeli community to encourage pluralism and liberal democratic values. We Jews tend to be very self-critical and introspective, and Israel is no exception. There are many organizations and think tanks that promote democracy and pluralism in Israel. As you know, I participated in a 3-year program at the Shalom Hartman Institute, which promotes these values. And I'll list other organizations on my Facebook page after Shabbat so you can all see and get some ideas and if you're interested in participating. We all also should support our conservative and reform movements in Israel that are working at the grassroots level with so-called secular Israelis who already light Shabbat candles and have Passover seders, but because they're not Orthodox, they think of themselves as secular. Now, why am I talking to you about this tonight? Besides the fact that I just spoke last Sunday to a different audience. Well, because you, here in this room, well, particularly the Jewish folks here, are all Jewish leaders. If you don't think you are leaders, think again. Remember that statistic about 6 million Jews in America? Only half of them are even affiliated with a congregation. So Jews who come to a synagogue on a Friday night, in this pouring rain, you are all by definition leaders. So don't think of yourself as just tourists or passengers on the good ship Judaism. We all need to take an active role in steering and sailing the ship. So we all need to get out our oars and start rowing. This is what the Jewish people have always done. When we see a problem, we don't turn around and run around like Chicken Little with our heads cut off screaming about the sky is falling. When we see a problem, we start working on a solution. Now, I've suggested many ways that we can do that to strengthen world Jewry and to strengthen our connection with our cousins in Israel. And I'm sure you'll think of many more ways to do it. Together we can get this ship moving in the right direction, full steam ahead. I have every confidence that when we all work together, really listening to each other, taking the best of all our ideas, and finding creative ways to compromise, bad word in society today. Despite our differences of opinion, we can achieve wondrous results. The anthropologist Margaret Mead famously said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And since we live in Houston, I would add another famous expression that is equally applicable to this situation. Failure is not an option. Shabbat Shalom.